Bridging Chicago.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, one of your hosts, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'm joined by Liz Herrera, a career coach who has a wealth of knowledge for us. And Liz, I feel like this is one of those times where I'm like, how do we get all of what you have in here out there in a reasonable amount of time? But we're going to try and do our best here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on your show, Nathan.
Yeah. We always like to start with our guests because we are bridging Chicago, and so we like to make that connection. So we'd like to start talking about your Chicago story. So are you from Chicago, or did you come here from somewhere else?
Born and raised in Chicago. I'm from the Pilsen neighborhood. I've been in Chicago my entire life.
Okay. Admittedly, I haven't been to Pilsen too many times. One of the times that I have, though, is in the marathon, kind of runs through Pilsen, and it's such an amazing neighborhood. During that time, there's a lot of vibrancy, obviously, but in the other times that I've been there too, it just is like such a fun neighborhood with so much to see that I don't know if people always realize everything that kind of is contained in Pilsen.
Oh yeah, I mean it has changed, but it's definitely there's a lot of culture and richness, and I mean it's where I grew up. Family members. My father still lives in Pilsen, and so many great restaurants.
Yeah.
So there's absolutely, and I still live close by, so I have
Okay.
tamales on Sundays. So it's
Yeah.
definitely still a lot of our our heritage there's still parts of it there for sure.
Yeah. Growing up in Pilsen, I'm assuming you were pretty close to your family, a lot of family ties there.
Yes.
So did that sort of affect the way that you grew up, the way that you thought about like what was important to you, what you valued, and then what you wanted to do after you graduated from high school there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I did obviously go to the neighborhood high school. I went to Benito Juarez High School. But absolutely, Nathan, everything is tied to my personal values and my upbringing. So
Yeah.
I'll share with you. Growing up, um, my mom actually passed away when I was 5 years old, and I have two younger sisters.
Okay.
And so very young parents. My father was 25,
Yeah.
and so he did not have a high school diploma, and he worked in a factory. And so we were under the care of my grandparents, were his parents. And so while he worked, they took care of us. We went to school. And so down the road, when I was a teenager, my father lost his job. He had a back injury, got injured working at the factory. So he essentially was jobless. And
Yeah.
I watched him study for the GRE. No, the GED. GRE is grad school. And
Yeah.
watching him, Nathan, every night, working on the floor till midnight with the
Yeah.
back pain. And I thought to myself, I said, no, I said that I want a different life. And, he's killing
Yeah.
himself for us here. So for me, getting an education was going to be something very important, even though I didn't know how I was going to do it. I knew that was something that I had to do. So it really did stem from the discipline and the focus that my father had, and I feel like I may have some of those traits that have taken me
Yeah.
in my own personal journey.
Yeah. Education is so important, and as a resource, it just opens so many doors that you wouldn't necessarily have access to if you weren't able to be educated. And yet, it's something that there's still this large disparity between how different people in the city are educated, partly based on where you live, based on the income that your parents make. I mean, there's so many things that go into how people are educated here in Chicago. And as you think about education as a resource, how do you see this disparity, and what do you think about how we are resourcing kids in all different parts of the city, whether it's south, southwest, west side, north side, city center here? Like, How do you see that education as a resource and the importance of it, and then how we're doing as a city in educating our kids?
Oh, there's definitely a gap and disparities depending, like as you said, where your zip code is, and the type
Yeah,
of neighborhood. If you're, depending on the type of school, right? So I can only speak of my
yeah,
personal experience, and so I went to the neighborhood high school, under resourced, of course, but being a student or in the community, you don't know these things when you're there. And once you start hitting, you go to college and you start seeing the difference, like, oh, you were involved in this or you did that. We didn't have that in our high school. And so you start
yeah, yeah,
seeing those gaps. And so I feel like it really depends where you live and also the type of influences that you have in your family, the type of exposures that you have, that all makes a huge difference. But there's a ton of work that needs to be done in some of our inner city high schools and elementary schools. And again, I can only speak of my own personal experience, but I definitely saw that there was a pretty wide gap in my learning
yeah,
experience. But there are people and mentors and programs that are out there to help support students that are in their educational journey. And I think having supportive family makes a huge difference, because I
yeah.
know that that
Hmm.
was important for me, and even just, going to college, finishing college, it was having that family support for sure.
Yeah, and I think that having grandparents who could step in and help out, but seeing your parents, in your case, your dad, like just give everything they have to create a better life. I think every parent probably wants a better life for their kids than what they have. Even if you had a good life, you still want better for your kids than what you had yourself. And I think that one of the things that you said that really made me think about a past series that we did was how you don't know what resources are out there until you see them and other people using them, and you're like, wait, what? Like, you have this beautiful library, and we have this like rundown thing that never has any books. Like, um, it's tough because it's not just access to resources, but even knowing what those resources are, I think, is a barrier. And so, as you start to discover that more, I mean, as your world sort of opened up more, what did you think about stepping into that, and then how does that sort of affect the way that you give back now?
Oh, that's a great question, Nathan. So I actually, I had a mentor in high school, and she was a student teacher
Hmm.
at the University of Illinois Chicago. And so she was actually the one who encouraged me to fill out the applications, fill out financial aid and all that good stuff. And so I got into the university, so I'll never forget my first day. And so I am a first generation college student, obviously, and I'm walking into, my father dropped me off on the first day. I felt like I was in kindergarten. I remember walking on campus, and so UIC is a large institution, and I would hear stories, where we don't tend to succeed there. People fail. It's so big. You're just a number.
Mm,
So I'm going in with all these like thoughts, right? And so I go in and I'm thinking, like, I do not belong here. This is the scariest of things. And I'm in the class and I try to sit in the back of the room of the lecture hall. There's so many students. And I'm like, I'm just gonna be invisible for a minute. And so
yeah,
just, kind of went through the motions, and I thought, let me just see what happens. There's no expectations. No one is telling me you have to graduate from college because no one's done it. And my father's like,
yeah, right,
go to school, do your thing, no pressure. And so that I kind of went with that mindset. And so going in and just discovering even how to survive and how to leverage resources, asking questions and being curious, that all contributed to the other experiences I was going to explore, how I was going to choose my college major or even
yeah,
volunteering. And so now in my role, so now 20 plus years later, I oversee a career office within the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, which is my home college. And so now I get to work with students that I think about myself when, feeling lost and being the first in my family,
hmm,
and just looking at them and saying, like, you're going to be okay. You're here.
yeah, yeah,
Take advantage of the resources, talk to people, importance of mentorship. And so I'm very confident in their abilities. A lot of times they are not, But
Yeah.
having lived it and also seeing other students and friends of mine overcoming some barriers but still being successful is really what drives what I do today in my career.
Yeah. I think that's a great point that even when you're not confident in your ability to succeed, there's generally someone who is confident for you. And sometimes leaning on that can be really helpful and can get you through those moments where you're like, I think I'm going to fail this class. And if I fail this class, I will not graduate. So it can be really tough to if you don't have those people, but they're generally out there. And offices like yours, I think, are really good at that too. The career counseling and the student advisement offices, and I think they're probably underutilized at campuses because I know like last thing any college student wants to do is go to office hours or go to see a career counselor or something because you're already doing so much. But I think those resources are very underutilized, and I mean, excuse me, anytime that I've gone there, it's like they're just waiting for you. They just are like, "Let me help you. I'm here. Like I've been waiting for you." So it's always been great experiences with that.
Oh, that is true. I think you got it right in the nose. They're definitely underutilized, and I find that it can be intimidating. A lot of times, some of our students will say, "Well, I don't know what to ask. It's scary."
Yeah.
And it's like, no, well, that's you don't have to know why you're there. We'll have a conversation and we'll guide you through the process. And it happens a lot with even established professionals, even reaching out to a career coach. It's very personal. Uh,
Hmm.
and people, there's of course there's that layer of intimacy, but also there's that fear of the unknown. But
Yeah.
definitely, yes, I think there are a ton of great services and resources within the college level that are definitely underutilized.
Yeah. Um, do you remember what your father was like when you graduated? Like the pride that he had. I'm thinking about like how he must have felt to see you graduate. Do you remember what that was like?
Oh my goodness, yes. So my father has always been very, very proud. Like he
Yeah.
sometimes doesn't say things, but I could just tell. But no, he's always, he's like, oh, I don't know what you do, but I'm always telling people, she helps students and I think she's a teacher. um,
Yeah.
I actually graduated when I graduated from UIC. I graduated in December, and we didn't have ceremony, and it was
Okay.
the following May. And I didn't want to
Right.
go because I'm like, "Oh, I already graduated. Why am I gonna do this?" And the only reason why I went was because of my father. So I'm
Okay.
like, "I have to do this for him." So yeah, my father, even though I'm in my 40s, he still shows so much pride, and he is my number one cheerleader. That is for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. When I was looking into your background, and I came across your podcast, uh, one of the words that really stuck out to me was the word niche that you used because to me niche means it's like finding your special thing. It's finding what makes you unique and really utilizing that and and doing what you want to do as a career. And maybe it's being an entrepreneur, maybe it's doing your own thing, but it's finding your niche so that you give that to the world. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is in the past, especially being different was not good. It was like if you were different, if you were unique, it was going to be difficult to find a company that would bring you on and say like, oh, this person is great because they are different, because they have this unique skill set, because they are very niche. It's like now I think we're starting to see how beneficial it is for people to bring themselves to work, to bring who they are, to bring what makes them unique, and to do their niche thing, so that everyone benefits. So for you, can you tell me like why that word is special? Is so special that you kind of highlight that, and then sort of how do people leverage that in their day-to-day work to help them not just help themselves, not just help the company, but to like down the road to be something bigger than who they are right now.
Yeah, I always tell people, own your truth, and I think part of that is really knowing. what your strengths are. So I do like to describe myself
Yeah.
as a strengths-based coach. And the reason behind that is that I, like you mentioned before, being able to recognize the talents of other people, and it's so hard to recognize that on our own talents, but we are all,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we all have those talents, and sometimes we just need someone to guide us to uncover those things. And so when we recognize what those things are, then we're able to bring our full self, our full, really our full potential. And so what I have found is that individuals that are not leveraging their talents, their themes in, like the workplace or in the type of career that they're in, then they're not satisfied in what they're doing. So I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
Let's say that you are someone that is strong in empathy. Your themes are around relationship building, but if you're in a career path that has nothing to do with building relationships and connecting with people, then you're probably not going to have that satisfaction. And I feel that when
Yeah.
you are satisfied in your role in an organization, it's going to come through in your work, in how you impact the people you're serving, your colleagues, and just bringing your whole self to your position. So that is something that I'm very passionate about, is helping people really own that truth, whatever that is for you as an individual, and not going into directions that are somebody else's dreams or somebody else's
Yeah.
expectations. So like not trying to lose ourselves among all the noise that we hear and the pressure. So that's something that I really focus on, is like you bring yourself, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, and embracing that.
Yeah.
That's my mindset.
Uh, Kind of along with that, sort of pulling out of that, uh, can you talk to us about emotion? Because I feel like we all think that emotion has no place in business. Like you shouldn't be emotional. You shouldn't be. I think that especially for women, they've had to deal with people saying, "Oh, she can't be a leader because she's too emotional." Um, how do you handle emotion in business, and is it something that you can bring into your work and make decisions that are somewhat emotionally based?
I'm all about the human connection, and it's when we come to work, we're human, and
Hmm.
I believe they're being professional. And when I think about emotion, I think about all the types of emotions that come through, right? Whether that's anger, love, compassion, all of those things. And I think there's a
Yeah.
professional way of showcasing where you're not, you have to be mindful of other people around you, but I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, right, and thinking about emotion, I do lead with 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 emotion, and I
Hmm.
connect with people, and for me, it's like the person comes first rather than it's an employee. Like if someone is upset or someone is having a bad day or whatever the case, my first inclination is not like, oh, they're just horrible. It's like, something's happening, something's going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we don't know. And for me, you're right. Because I think for a long time people are like, oh, Liz, you're too nice. Or, it's like there's this stigma, right? Like, oh, you're too nice. And for me, I never thought myself being in any type of leadership capacity. Because I always thought you had to be strict, you have to be, really managey.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, I've embraced that, well, that's not my personality. And
Yeah.
yeah, I am somebody that is, that yeah, I'll cry, and it's okay to be vulnerable. Like I'm always saying, like it is okay to be vulnerable. And it just shows that that's just my side and that's how I react to things. But of course, in terms of decision making, I like my decisions to be sound, or even if I'm not sure if I'm feeling, like, okay, I'm being biased, is talking to someone else that I trust to help me brainstorm and kind of think things through. But one thing I guess kind of like a random side note, like emailing, I always tell people like never send an email when you're angry. So really,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
you know, when it comes to emotions, it's like really being mindful. I think that's the emotional intelligence, being mindful of the situation
Yeah.
where you're at.
Yeah. Um, I wonder how did you get into career coaching? Because it's something where I've wondered this before. Like, do people just like go into counseling and realize like, oh, this is the kind of area that I really like, or is it something that like when you grew up, people just always came to you for advice? Like, I've wondered that before, and so I'll just ask you, how did you get into career coaching
Yeah,
or
so
coaching in general?
yeah, I actually it's funny because this is why I tell my students, it's like, you just never know where things are gonna lead. And so I always was interested
Yeah.
in education. And so I did some tutoring at an alternative high school. Fast forward, after I finished college, they offered me a job, and it was an entry-level admin job. But because I had a
Mhm.
college degree, at some point they had a career counseling position open. It was entry level, so that was my first exposure to career counseling. And it was more like kind of a guidance counselor, even though that's not my
Okay.
background. I'm not certified in that area, but in that position, I was able to guide students through, their ap- college applications, taking them to college tours. And I had just gone through it as, I had just graduated from college. And so advising start was something that I'm like, well, this is interesting. I enjoy this and I love teaching and presenting. And so my career just kind of took off from there. And then I had the opportunity to go into a graduate program that was specifically in higher education. And so I did
Okay.
that program, and when I finished, I thought, okay, well, I should be working in higher ed. So I applied for a position at a community college. And while my role was more about helping students transfer from a 2-year college to a 4-year university, I found myself doing career fairs, helping students with
Mm.
interviewing, resume writing. The funny thing, Nathan, is that I didn't even know that career coaching or career advising was a career. Didn't know that it
Yeah.
existed. And so
Yeah.
I saw a position at UIC for a career counselor. And I'm like, well, I'm always teaching people how to, write resumes, cover letters, interview. So I should be able to do this. So even though that wasn't my necessarily my background per se, I still applied. They gave me a chance. I was able to talk about my transferable skills. And that's where my career in career development pretty much started. And so from
Okay.
there, it's just I've been at UIC for about 15 years in different spaces. And that's how I've been just in the field of career development. So my master's is in higher education, but in my career, I've been doing a ton of anything training, certification that just makes me a more effective career coach. I'm on it. So always learning. Yes.
Yeah. Um, I learned recently, I took this class and I learned about the differences between leadership and management.
Mm,
And it's interesting because you think about, at work, you may not be a manager. So it's like, I'm not going to be able to do those certain management things. And if it's like, if I don't think that this person is really working out, what am I going to do about it? I'm not their manager. I'm not their supervisor, whatever. But leadership is something that really everyone can do, no matter what position you're at. If you are a receptionist, I work at a law firm, so we have paralegals and attorneys, and all of those levels you can lead. So for you, how do you help people see themselves as leaders and start to live and work through that lens?
yeah, that's a great question. I and because it took me a long time to embrace that myself. I feel that we
Hmm.
all have leadership qualities, and I think it's just redefining how we see leadership. As you said, maybe people thinking about manager or even having that
Yeah, yeah,
title. And so I have worked with so many talented professionals that don't hold that senior level title, but they just exude leadership qualities. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
believe that, again, using their strengths where maybe they're really good at mentoring others, setting the example, going above and beyond, teaching people or paving the way, or reaching out to someone and say, hey, you may want to check this out, or this resource, or, taking initiative and serving on a committee, a board, utilizing your skills and your strengths to advance the goals of the organization, or just putting yourself out there maybe in the community. I think those are all leadership qualities, and you can definitely be a leader in your organization, in your role, regardless of your job title.
yeah. Um, Working in higher education, I mean, UIC is from what I know. I grew up in Illinois, but not in the Chicago area. UIC has been pretty diverse in its history, and I think there's been a lot of people, partly because of its location in the city, partly because it is in a big city. It seems like it's been a very diverse place, and there's a lot of people who go there. from all different backgrounds. But um, as true as that may be, there hasn't always been a high level of successive people graduating. The difference between people starting college and actually getting a degree, um, maybe those numbers don't correlate as much. So, have you seen a change there? And have you seen more people from diverse backgrounds actually earning degrees and finding success in getting through the program?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer that. The only reason why is because when I think about UIC, UIC is vast. And so
Yeah,
UIC has so many programs and colleges. So like I work for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, but then you have engineering, public health. And so I feel that a lot of times, they have their own numbers and I don't have the data in front of me. So I couldn't tell you that, like, oh, uh, that there's been this significant increase. And then it depends too, like what demographic are you looking at? But I will say
yeah,
definitely we take pride in the diversity of our student body. But in terms of those numbers, like I don't think that's my area. I don't even
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I wouldn't necessarily be able to capture that.
Yeah, and the diversity of UIC um, sets it apart for sure. What makes that special though? What about that diversity makes it a special place to be?
Yeah, and I can even speak to when I was a student there.
Yeah,
What I loved about or what I love about UIC, even working there, I think in all parts. I mean, UIC's been such a huge part of my life as a student and as a professional. Is being around people that are different from me, but also people that look like me. So I've always embraced, learning about other cultures and people's backgrounds and socioeconomic status, and just going in as a student initially, just thinking like, wow, these people come from these neighborhoods or these countries or these suburbs or whatever the case, and it's like they're so different from me, and I loved that. I loved
yeah,
meeting all kinds of people, and I think sometimes we tend to try to stay with our group because that's comfortable, and while I did do that, I just to me it was like, oh, I get to be a partner with this person that is from a completely different country. And so as a working professional, I've also had the pleasure of connecting with diverse colleagues, and I'm always learning, and that's something that I really really enjoy about that pride that we have at UIC.
yeah. This is we're coming up on a season where you're gonna get a whole new class of kids and a whole new group of, well, not just kids really, and especially these days. People are starting to go to school, go to college obviously when they come out of high school, but also I'm sure there's been an increase in 30, 40, 50 year olds going back to school. So as people think about going back to school and starting it again, what would you say to people who are maybe nervous about, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to, like, if I'm a more experienced person, what's going to be like sitting in a classroom? And if I'm, fresh out of high school, am I going to be like wide eyed and how am I going to like handle being on my own a little more and not having people, really force me to do the work? Can you give some thoughts to people who are maybe nervous about starting school again?
I mean, I always say the fear of the unknown. One of the things I always tell my clients, or students, regardless, because everybody always sees the deficiencies, the barriers. So I'm gonna just give an example. So somebody that's starting brand new, like, oh, I'm fresh, I have no experience, and it's like, no, that's great. You're a sponge. You have the energy because you don't know what's in front of you. You have that ability to go above and beyond and learn and explore. And there's a lot of there shouldn't be that much pressure because you people know, like, you're new, you're learning, and there are mechanisms in place to help you transition, right? So going to
Okay.
school, it's like you've survived high school. How was your first year? And a lot of times students are like, well, that was scary, but now you're in college, same thing. And it's this is part of this is part of our life. This is part of our
Yeah.
entire all our phases. But then when I have someone who is, let's say, somebody a little more established, or they're like, oh, I'm going to start school, I'm going to go back to school rather, and I'm going to be with a bunch of 18-year-olds. I'm not going to fit in. And then for me, I'm like, well, you have all this world life experience that you get to bring. You know how to study. You're there. You're going to be focused. You're not going to be, hindered because of certain pressures that you don't see anymore because you're beyond that. You have that life
Yeah.
experience. So I feel that regardless of where you're at in your phase, in your season, there are strengths. I go back to the strengths, and there are positive qualities and attributes that you can leverage to help you through that process, through that journey. But it's so easy to see the negative or the deficiencies rather than the actual strong things
Yeah.
that can be helpful to elevate wherever you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Um, I want to ask you about mental health because it's something that has had a huge effect on people, especially we all know what we've been going through recently in the last few years and the effect that that's had on people both in school and at work. So for you, what are the mental health considerations that you suggest people to take, and then how do you sort of deal with that when you have to be a professional and you have to deal with challenges that happen every day? What would you say about kind of utilizing mental health resources for people to try and help them get through all this?
Yeah, and I think if anything, COVID did teach us about kind of really zeroing in and resetting and
Hmm.
really recognizing what's truly important to us, right? And
Hmm.
I think for me, I'm all about well being, self care, mental health, and that I know there's a stigma, especially in certain cultures, about asking for help and using those types of resources. For me, that was something that was not talked about growing up. Seeking,
Yeah.
mental health therapy or that type of thing, and so I know that we are having more of those conversations. So I always tell people that your well being comes first, and with
Yeah.
anything that I'm working with, right? And so when I'm doing career development, career coaching, it's doing that temperature check. Where are you? Because you bring your whole self to the conversation. Our career,
Yeah.
I mean, all parts of our life are embedded in talking about these things. So I feel that people definitely need to use resources when they are, when they feel that they need that support, and wherever you're at, right? If you're a student, if you're a working professional, um, and with some of my former bosses too, who would say, "Liz, you need to take some time off, take some vacation." And I think at the
Yeah.
beginning of
Yeah.
my career, it was always like, "No, I just need to work, 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 and prove myself." And that was part of it too, always wanting to prove, like I belong
Yeah.
here. And so I think one of the things that I've learned in my years of working is it's okay to take some time off. The work will still be there, and the world will still be working and revolving. And so I think it's important to take some time for yourself and be with family and really thinking about what's important.
Yeah. I want to give you an opportunity to share anything else that you have for us. I know we talked about a lot, but I'm sure there's more out there. But I want to give you a chance to share anything else that you want to share with us, and then to let people know how they can connect with you to learn more.
Yeah, I'm all about positivity and connecting with people that are going to be supportive, but also to find that strength within yourself. I think we all have that motivation,
Yeah.
and as I mentioned before, owning your truth. And I say that even to my young nieces, to my niece, my nephew, my cousins, and my siblings. Um, we all have something to give, and I live this life looking for joy. And so if
Yeah.
something is not giving me joy, then I know that I have to reconnect with myself. But we have the answers. We have the answers within. So really paying attention to that. And if it means having to talk to someone, your cheerleader, your supporters, your mentors, to uncover what that looks like, um, it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah. definitely. And then just let us know how we can connect with you, how we can keep in touch, and if people want to find out more, how they can do that.
Yeah, so I have several platforms. So I am on Instagram at Liz Career Coaching. I also have my Liz Career Coaching podcast. So you can just Google Liz Career Coaching and you probably find all my social media on.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So I love to give career advice, from job search strategies to self care and navigating the career landscape.
Awesome. We will make sure to follow Liz Career Coaching on Instagram, and then obviously on LinkedIn as well, as we're pretty active on LinkedIn. So, Liz, I want to say thank you so much for your time. It's been so valuable to us, and I know it is a great resource. So, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you to our listeners who continue to follow us in season 5. You can find all of this season and our previous 4 seasons of episodes on our website, www.bridgingchicago.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter, where our handle is @bridgingchicago. And of course, we're very active on LinkedIn. So you can search us, Bridging Chicago, on LinkedIn. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon on another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.